Even before the end of its opening weekend, it was clear that Borderlands was destined to be a massive flop worldwide, rejected by critics and audiences alike. You should still give the movie a chance though, says the CEO of the company behind the games, because, and I quote, "a lot of people worked really hard on it." Well, that's no reason, because they all got paid for their jobs already, but more importantly, that argument is a Hail Mary the powers that be only resort to when they've already given up on any chance of success, which, upon reflection, this iteration of Borderlands never had. Let's see why. Full disclosure first, I have never played the games, I never will, and as of the making of this postmortem, I have not seen the movie either. Then you might wonder, if I haven't seen the movie, then how can I possibly do a postmortem on it? The answer to which is, in the bigger scheme of things, no one else saw the movie either. This movie's big problem isn't really the negative reviews, though they certainly don't help, but the fact that audiences collectively decided, in advance, to sit the movie out. You see, this is not a case of the audience attending in the kind of numbers you'd expect for a $120 million movie, not liking it and then thrashing it in social media, thus preventing any further traffic and box office. No, that's not what happened here. Instead, what happened was that the audience flat out rejected Borderlands unseen. As such, there's no need to look at the movie itself to see what it did wrong, as the problem is outside of the movie. The posters and the trailers told the audience everything they needed to know to stay away. The negative reviews certainly didn't help, but the bigger problem for the movie is that even before there were any negative reviews, there was zero hype and zero interest in it, despite the popularity of the game franchise. To see why audiences rejected it this profoundly, let's begin with briefly going back in time to when the movie was being developed. The Borderlands movie was first announced in August of 2015, originally with Lee Vanell of Insidious and Upgrade fame in talks to direct. And if the production team had hurried up and gotten the ball rolling back then, the movie could possibly have turned out alright. But they didn't. Instead, it was placed on the back burner, where it remained in slow and gradual development, going through a series of writers and would-be directors, all while Hollywood collectively lost its mind because the Orange Man Bad was in office, leading the industry to go all in on DEI, thus signaling their virtue and their resistance. This production was not immune to that overall industry trend. Development on the version of the movie that was ultimately released this weekend arguably begun in February of 2020, when Eli Roth stepped on board as director. From there, things at first moved quickly, with Cate Blanchett being the first to be cast. Incidentally, that alone suggested that they may be going for a somewhat female-centric direction, which was all the rage in Hollywood at that time. The movie was then filmed in 2021, during the lockdowns which would have added to the cost, and 2 years later, the movie was subjected to several weeks of reshoots helmed by Tim Miller. In the aftermath of these, Craig Mazin, the writer of the original shooting draft, as well as the fantastic miniseries Chernobyl, removed his name from the project, suggesting he was far from happy with where it was going. And now, a whopping 3 years after cameras first rolled, the movie was released to the public, bombing right out the gate, worse than anyone ever imagined that it possibly could. Much of that, I think, is due to the timing of the release, which I submit could not have been worse, for 3 reasons. Let's go through them, one by one. I mentioned already that at the time when this movie was being developed, Hollywood went all in on female-centric movies and girl bosses, and it was specifically male-driven brands, tentpole movies and other genre features with a massive and mostly male fan following that has gotten this treatment. But by now, or technically by last year, the audience have frankly had enough of this messaging being shoved down their throats. And it's worth mentioning that the female audience is even more fed up with Girlboss movies than the male audience. Case in point, while both Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, The Marvels, Madame Web, and Furiosa were all massive bombs across the board, they still managed to bomb even harder with a female audience that was expected to flock to these movies to see themselves represented on screen than they did with the male audience that made up the built-in audience. Between them, those 4 movies, all of which were released in the last 12 months, combined lost upwards of $1 billion. That's how fed up the audience is with girl bosses, and that's even without bringing in streaming flops like The Acolyte, Echo, or Secret Invasion. Now again, I haven't seen Borderlands myself, maybe it takes a different route, but the posters and trailers sell this as yet another girl boss adventure, only this time with grannies. That may have seemed like a great idea when this was being developed back in 2020, but now, in 2024, even a whiff of female centricity is enough to tank any would-be blockbuster. That, I think, is the main overriding reason why the movie is flopping the way that it is. But there are 2 more factors that contribute towards making that flop all the greater. Just a few months ago, Furiosa was released, a Mad Max spin-off without Mad Max. I already listed it among the other major female-centric flops to come out in the last 12 months, and while an argument can be made that Furiosa isn't a girl boss, I submit that the posters and trailers for that movie created the perception that she was, and that perception was enough to kill that movie's chances at the box office, in the process also killing the 2 other Mad Max movies that were planned for the future. But this isn't about Furiosa, it's about Borderlands, and in being released so shortly after Furiosa, Borderlands seems derivative. By which I mean audiences already decided not to see one post-apocalyptic movie set in a desert, starring what posters and trailers made look like a girl boss. So why on earth would they go see Borderlands when the posters and trailers promise pretty much the exact same thing, only with even more and much older girl bosses? Because to anyone not familiar with the games, if you squint, Borderlands looks like a Furiosa ripoff. And unfortunately for Borderlands, there is another project that makes it seem all the more derivative. I know Amazon's Fallout series has its detractors, and while I see your point of view, that doesn't change the fact that Season 1 of Fallout was a massive hit for Amazon. And not only that, it was a massive hit with the majority of the audience as well. Like Borderlands, Fallout was also based on a famous video game franchise. It is also post-apocalyptic, set in a desert, and while not female-centric, it was female-led. It was plenty diverse, and on top of that, the majority of the audience found it to be good, and are eagerly awaiting Season 2, which is being developed right now as we speak. Against that success, who needs an also-ran like Borderlands? Then, of course, there is also the matter of the reviews. While more positive reviews have popped up since, for a while there, the one positive review from Grace Randolph was the only thing standing between the movie and a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, if we've learned anything in recent years, it is that critics are also guilty of review bombing, perhaps more so than audiences. So sometimes, if their reason for rejecting the movie or series in question is that it's too based and anti-woke for the critics, though not for the audience, then critical rejection may be a good thing. This was the case with, for instance, The Sound of Freedom, as well as a number of comedy specials from the likes of Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais, and most recently, Joe Rogan. Unfortunately for Borderlands though, that would not appear to be the case here, as audience reviews aren't much better than the critic reviews. Instead, this is a case where the critics and the audience, certainly those that have seen the movie thus far, are largely in agreement that it just didn't deliver. There were many different directions a Borderlands movie could have gone, but it would appear that in every conceivable way, the filmmakers chose the wrong one. Did you see Borderlands? If so, what did you think of it? And if not, what was your reason for sitting it out? Let me know in the comments.